Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing sourdough with you guys. So if you have been watching my vlogs for a while, you know that I have started a journey with sourdough. So I have tried it 3 different times to make sourdough starter and it just did not want to work for me the first 2 times. So round 3, I started my sourdough starter October 3rd. And we're still going, which is great. So I've made a lot of sourdough and, well, a lot for me. And I decided to go ahead and share with you guys some of what I'm doing and some tips and things that I do whenever I'm attempting to make the best sourdough I can. So I actually have a sourdough already in the process, in the works. And I'm going to be using that as kind of like my example and share what it actually looks like, because I know that obviously it's a cooking video or baking video, so you don't want to, not see what's going on. So if you're new, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below. I make all kinds of different videos. I don't typically make cooking videos, but I have been asked recently to make more. So I am gonna get on that and share what y'all wanna see. So if y'all have any requests for different cooking videos, if you watch my vlogs, you've seen any recipes I've made and you want me to make a dedicated video to that, go ahead and leave that in the comments down below and let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started with this specific recipe, which I got from the Clever Carrot, I will link it down in the description box below. I obviously didn't come up with this on my own, but I also am gonna link down below the book that I've been using to come up with my sourdough starter, and I did a couple sourdough recipes with them as well. But there are hundreds of sourdough recipes all over the place, so if you don't use this recipe and you don't use any of the recipes in the book, use whatever you can find. But the main point of this that I want to emphasize is the sourdough starters. So just like there is hundreds of recipes for sourdough bread, there's hundreds of recipes for sourdough starter. Everybody kind of has their own take on it. So essentially what you're doing is creating the yeast that you would use in a bread recipe, the dry yeast, but it's homemade and better for you. So it has natural bacteria in it, which makes it rise and become alive, which I say quote unquote alive because everybody says alive. It is technically alive, but I don't like to think about it that way really. So yeah, you're basically creating the foundation of bread with the sourdough starter. So sourdough starter can take anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on the recipe you use and the temperature of your kitchen and all that. But again, this takes quite some time, so when you're watching this, you're not gonna be able to start today, which, I mean, you can start today, but you're not gonna be able to make dough and bread today. So this recipe is what I used for my sourdough starter. It obviously is the one that worked and has been working. So what you're gonna need for that is whole wheat flour. I use King Arthur just because that's what I have available here. I use whole wheat flour and then all-purpose unbleached flour. Don't get bleached flour because if you think about it, when you bleach flour, you're taking out some of the natural bacteria that is gonna be able to make the dough alive. So you don't wanna get bleached flour, you want unbleached all-purpose flour. And then all you're gonna need is water. Some recipes recommend filtered water. Some recipes don't really say whether or not to use filtered water. I have used unfiltered and filtered water. They both work just fine. So now that you have made your sourdough starter, you can go ahead and start on a bread recipe. The thing that has really helped me, there are obviously recipes that go by cups, but what has really helped me is having a kitchen scale with grams, because with baking, especially for me, I like to use grams. I like to be more specific just because there are different ways to measure using cups and I don't want to take any chances. So I like to use a kitchen scale. Obviously, if you find a recipe that doesn't need one, then you don't have to use one, but I would recommend getting one. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with this recipe and sharing all of the steps that I went through for this specific recipe. So here are a few things you need. Obviously, active sourdough starter, a big bowl. I like to use my KitchenAid mixer bowl just because it's the biggest one I have. This is a Dutch whisk. Just use a regular whisk or a spatula, it works just fine. And then a kitchen scale. Some recipes don't require this, but I highly recommend getting this. And a bench scraper. This helps just get the dough off the table and helps you to shape it in the future. For this recipe specifically, you'll need some bread flour, some sea salt. I have this Himalayan pink salt. and some olive oil. This recipe specifically calls for olive oil, but not all sourdough recipes do. So step one, what I'm doing is taking 250 grams of filtered water. It didn't say to use filtered water, so just use whatever water you have on hand. This definitely looks weird, but getting it precise is my biggest struggle, so this is what I have to do to make it work. So next you're going to take 25 grams of olive oil. Again, I am just pouring it until it comes to 25 grams, just because that's the easiest way for me to do it, less dishes. But yeah, 25 grams of olive oil, and then you're going to go ahead and add in your starter after that. For this recipe, you'll be needing 150 grams of active starter, which means you've fed it within the last, I would say, 5 to 12 hours, where it's nice and bubbly and it's reached almost the top of your jar. So here I'm just taking my Dutch whisk and whisking those ingredients together. You don't need to use a Dutch whisk. A regular whisk will work perfectly fine. So now I'm going to be taking 10 grams of quote-unquote fine sea salt. This is Himalayan pink salt. It works perfectly fine. Use whatever salt you have on hand. So this is another step that you don't really have to do, but what I like to do is take a sifter and sift the flour and salt so that the ingredients come together a little bit easier. So you're going to be taking 500 grams of bread flour. Again, I use the King Arthur flour. Use whatever bread flour you can find, and I add the 10 grams of sea salt, or Himalayan pink salt in my case, on top of that, and then I sift it all the way through. Now we'll be combining our wet ingredients with our dry ingredients. Some recipes have you put the flour in thirds. This recipe didn't call for that, so I just dumped all the flour on in there. I really don't think it makes that much of a difference in this recipe, so just follow what your recipe tells you to do. Now you're going to whisk together the ingredients until they start to combine and the flour becomes absorbed. If things aren't working out too well with your whisk, just put it to the side and use your hand. Hey Portal, set a timer for 30 minutes. These 30 minutes are a perfect opportunity, or however long your bread is set to rise. It's a perfect opportunity to clean up your workspace because it can get really dirty really fast. Another thing you can do while you wait for the bread to rise for 30 minutes, you can refeed your sourdough starter. So here I'm using whole wheat flour and all-purpose flour. The amount of flour that you use will depend on how much starter you took out. So what I did is I was almost at my normal feeding where I take out half. So I just took another 50 grams out and I refilled it as if it were a regular feeding. So I would do 50 grams of all-purpose, 50 grams of whole wheat, and then 100 grams of water. So after your dough has been sitting in that bowl for about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your kitchen temperature, you're gonna take it out and form it into a nice bowl, kind of get all the ingredients nice and formed together, and then you're gonna throw it back in that bowl to rise for another 3 to 12 hours. So the recipe says to leave it with a plastic wrap over the top or a damp kitchen towel. For my experience, I would recommend a kitchen towel just because mine tends to dry out if I don't put a damp kitchen towel on top. This is optional, but after about 30 minutes to about an hour, you can take it out and fold it and stretch it to get some more air kind of in the dough, and then you're going to put it back in your bowl to set for the rest of the time. This makes me so excited. So I fed my sourdough this morning. This whole process, my dough has been just sitting, chilling. Here he is. But I wanted to share because this is the sourdough starter I fed this morning, and I'll flip the camera so that you can like actually see up close what this looks like, because it's kind of hard from here, but I'll show you what your starter should look like if you want to use it in bread. Okay, so it's not all the way up to the top of my jar, but I put it in a big jar so it like wouldn't explode anymore. But see how there's bubbles all up in it, like all around the sides. Some sides are not as bubbly, but what people usually do is put a rubber band on it. So like if you fed your sourdough and you are like tracking to see where it's at, it would probably be like about here, and it like usually doubles in size and becomes nice and bubbly like this. Like, oh, beautiful. Yeah, so it usually becomes bubbly like this, and that's when you know you're ready to use that starter. But I just wanted to share this with you guys because if you're wondering what active starter looks like, this is it. Sometimes it's way more bubbly than this, and sometimes it's not as bubbly. So, you know, as long as it's doubled in size, should be good to go. Another way to test it, here, I'll show you. So another way to test it is just take a small bowl, whatever bowl you have, bigger, smaller, cup, whatever. I like these because they're easy to clean. And put some water in it, just like that. And then take a spoon and grab a small little piece of your starter, if I can grab some, and you'll stick it in the water. Wait for it, wait for it. And if it floats, it's good to start and use for your bread. And one more tip for anyone who is not making bread every day, which is most people, you can take your sourdough starter after you feed it and you can put it in the fridge, which will slow down the fermentation process so that it'll last about a week. So you'll take it out and feed it once a week instead of once every day or like every other day. I feed it usually about every other day. I kind of like to like look at it and see what we're working with, because sometimes it'll be super active like this until next morning. And so I wait for it to kind of come back down and start to get hooch on top, which sounds weird, but hooch is just like a liquid on top that you'll see that basically tells you it needs to be fed. So there's a lot of different tips and tricks with sourdough that you'll kind of get used to how much you want to feed it and things like that. I like to look for a little bit of hooch just to feed it, because once you feed it, it'll be very active. Whenever I was feeding mine every single day, it wasn't as active, so I like to kind of be patient with it. I think it might depend on, you know, it being colder here than it is in Texas where I'm from, so I don't know. But yeah, so that's another tip and trick if you don't want to keep it out on your counter every day. But something you need to know is that you cannot put this in the fridge until it has become active. So I would wait at least 2 weeks before you go ahead and put this in the fridge. So here is what it's looking like a couple hours in. Actually, it's more than a couple hours. It's been about 5 hours. I think I'm gonna wait another probably 2 to 3, maybe even 4 hours before I start making this dough. The best rule of thumb that I've learned is that once it's doubled in size, it is ready to take out and bake, but you will have to let it rest another whole hour or more, like an hour to 2 hours before you bake it. So keep that into consideration before you take it out and get everything ready, because it will have to set another hour. All right, so now what I'm doing here is taking a proofing basket and putting flour all along the sides. I put quite a bit of flour, which I know it looks like a lot, but it is meant to keep the dough from sticking in the bowl. Some people will just use the cloth liner within the proofing basket to keep it from sticking in the bowl, but I like the way that it looks when I don't use the cloth, so I just use flour. So now what I'm doing here is folding the dough. There's a certain way that you can do it. I mean, obviously everybody has their own techniques, but what I do is I take it, stretch it out long ways, take it halfway in, close the seal, take the other half, close it in. There's a lot of flour on the workspace. Close it in and then do the same thing long ways. So I stretch it out and take one half about halfway through, close the seal. You'll feel a lot of air bubbles in it, which is good. And then the other side, you're gonna use that to flip it all the way over. And then you just kind of use your hands to make it into a little circle, and that's your shaping. I'm not the best at it, but I do try, and practice makes perfect. So you're gonna see me here pick it up and put it in the proofing basket seam side down. Do it the opposite way. I had to flip it whenever I realized it, but the seam should be up. So I know not everyone has a proofing basket, so what I'm doing here is just showing a couple different options that you can use if you don't have one of the ones that I have. So a regular old mixing bowl will work perfectly fine. Just make sure that you put a cloth inside of it, which I'll show you in just a second, but I have different kinds of mixing bowls, all kinds work. So after your dough has been resting for about an hour, go ahead and take some parchment paper, and I'm flipping the dough on top of it. Then I'm taking a brush and just brushing off the excess flour on it so it doesn't taste a lot like flour. So the next step is taking a knife or a razor or whatever you have and cutting a somewhat deep line through it so that some of the steam can be released inside the bread. So while I'm waiting for the timer to go off, I just wanted to pop in here and share some tips about the vessel you're cooking it in. So most recipes call for a Dutch oven, and that's why I invested in one. If you are not sure whether or not you want to purchase a Dutch oven, a great way to cook it, and I'll give you another option after this if you don't have this, but a great way to cook it is to take a cast iron skillet. When you preheat it in the oven, it's the same situation of like preheating that and pulling it out and putting the dough in it. But what you do is take a little baking pan I use like a 9x5 bread pan. You can use pretty much whatever you have. I wouldn't say like a sheet pan, but take a pan that's probably about this, couple inches thick, fill it up with water about halfway, and then whenever you put your Dutch oven in there to preheat, or I mean your cast iron in there to preheat, put the water in there as well. Take out the cast iron, put your dough in there, and then you put it back. What I also like to do to get a little bit more color on it is I'll take a spray bottle with just water in it, and I spray all around the edges of the oven and then close the oven quickly so that it creates the same steam that a Dutch oven would. If you don't have that, just replace the cast iron with a just plain baking sheet. If you don't have any of these fancier ways like a Dutch oven, there's definitely ways to still cook sourdough. Just gotta be innovative. Okay, so here is what mine looks like. It's obviously not as, you know, deep golden brown as I would like, but still gonna taste really great. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out of here with the parchment paper and set it on the baking sheet or baking rack for about an hour. Cheers, everybody. Stuff all over my mouth, but my goodness. There's nothing, and I mean nothing, like fresh sourdough. And the outside isn't too crunchy. So good. Okay, so that is everything. I really hope y'all enjoyed. Again, if y'all are interested in seeing more cooking, specifically cooking related videos, I cook all the time in my weekly vlogs, but if you want more dedicated videos, please let me know. Don't forget to click that subscribe button down below, give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.